Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first synchronous session for EDT 6030. My name's Devin Arms. I'll be your instructor for the next 6.5 weeks, I guess. This is, gosh, I don't know, probably my sixth or seventh time teaching this course. So I'm fairly comfortable and familiar with the material and look forward to learning along with you in the coming weeks. So the purpose of these synchronous sessions, as I shared, is really just to provide kind of an overview of the material that's covered in the readings and the discussion boards. And then in future sessions, we will go over the two assignments for this class. I always like to kind of just set the stage for students as far as like how this class functions. You've probably had other courses in your program where you had a lot of assignments or group projects or things of that nature. That's not this course. This course is more theoretical and theory based. So there is mostly just readings. You've seen, obviously, by looking at the syllabus, that there's quite a few discussion boards. Always remind students, those may seem like a chore, but the more you put into them, the more you get out of them, right? And then there are two formal assignments. There's an analysis paper, I think in module 5. You can kind of think of that as like a midterm paper. And then there's a final paper towards the end of the course. So that's really it. So I'm not sure if you're taking another class right now in addition to this, or if this is the only one, but hopefully that, maybe gives you a sense of what this course has in store. So anyways, it's a good course. The material is I feel like it's pretty relevant to what most of us do day in and day out. We kind of look at the concepts through a couple different lenses. One in terms of how could we apply this, in the classroom in an instructional setting, and then also how could we apply this professionally, with our colleagues and that sort of thing. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now. I do have a short slide deck that we'll go through. Tonight's class should just probably last about a half an hour or so. Again, I appreciate you coming to the live class. For those of you here, for those of you who aren't able to attend live, hopefully you're getting this through the recording that I will post sometime tomorrow, hopefully. Again, coming to it live, kind of you force yourself to commit to listening to the material, but if your schedules conflict for session 2, session 3, I understand that as well. But I do like to, again, just kind of make these available to you. So I know you're all busy. Again, props to you for doing grad school while also having a full-time job and other commitments. So I know it's a lot of work. Hopefully we'll get through this efficiently together. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. In these sessions, again, I'm not sure how other instructors have run them, but I don't typically force you to participate or turn on your camera or talk. Obviously, you're more than welcome to do so. I encourage you, if you have questions, to put them in the chat, and then I can either answer them, verbally if one person has a question. Usually, others have similar questions or the same question. But I don't, I know you've all had busy days and probably busy nights too. So don't feel like I'm going to, call you out on the carpet here to, share your reflections or thoughts or anything like that. Again, you're more than welcome to, but that's not typically how I run things unless there's a topic that warrants that sort of discussion. So, all right. So our agenda for this evening, just a quick introduction of the course, which I've kind of already gotten into a little bit. We'll review modules 1, that was last week, and then 2, which is the current week, and then we'll look ahead to module 3, which is the third week of the course. And then we'll talk about our next synchronous session, which we'll have in a couple of weeks. Before we get started, though, just a quick update on the discussion boards from last week. Thank you all for participating in the introduction. It was great to read about you and your backgrounds and kind of what you're bringing to the course. I will have that graded as well as kind of the formal discussion board number 1, hopefully in the next day or two. With them not being fully due until Sundays, usually it takes me a couple days at the beginning of the week to get through those. So again, just a little bit about me. I've been teaching here at Concordia since 2021, so about 5 years now. teach a few different courses in the educational technology leadership program, and then also an instructional design technology course as well. So really enjoy the opportunity to get through this material with you, and I find it valuable for me because I always end up learning just as much from you all and your experiences and what you're doing in your classrooms and districts and organizations that I can then take back and apply in my day job, which I do lead a technology department for a public school district here in Indiana. We're about an hour northwest of Indianapolis and about an hour and a half southeast of Chicago. So we're about 10 minutes from Purdue University. Go Boilermakers. I'm not a Purdue alum myself, but there obviously are a ton of Purdue alums in this area. So the school district where I serve, we have approximately 13,600 students, give or take. We have 20 schools altogether. So we've got 11 elementaries, 6 middle schools, and then 3 high schools. So 2 of those are traditional brick and mortar high schools. And then we do have a fully online high school as well. I also get the pleasure of leading that school. So I serve as the principal of our district's online school, in addition to leading the activities of the technology department in support of educational technology, operational technology, networking systems, teacher training, PD, all of the fun things. So again, that's kind of what I bring to the course in terms of my practical experience. I always try to, incorporate that into the courses as much as I can. It's one thing reading about these concepts in a textbook or whatever, in articles from, people who are in academia, but I think it's also helpful to try to then pull that back to the practical level of what does this actually look like in schools day in and day out. So all right. Again, this course, the focus is on how we can utilize technology tools to build and establish and support learning communities. So we will examine and evaluate different types of technologies in the design and development of learning communities, and then how that could also be used for some community outreach initiatives as well. The conceptual objectives, I won't read these to you word for word. They're from our syllabus. But basically, we're going to talk about different types of learning communities. Again, how those apply from an instructional perspective with our students, and then how they can also be applied in a professional setting as we work alongside other educators or professionals, depending on our role. So, as I shared in the introductory message for the course, like other classes I'm sure you've had here at Concordia, it's 8 weeks. There's 8 modules, so think of every module as a week. So the first few weeks of the course, again, focusing on a lot of the theoretical foundations of learning communities. And then starting in module 4, we kind of get into more of the where the rubber meets the road, I guess, and how you can actually establish some of these concepts in a real world setting. All right, so last week, kind of the introduction to the course, we started out by just defining what a learning community is. I know that, I don't know if it's still as true today, maybe it is at your school, but I know in the last 3, 4, 5 years, professional learning communities, also known as PLCs, have kind of been like a buzzword in schools. Every school is doing PLCs to some degree, bringing educators together in, groups, small groups, medium-sized groups for certain tasks. So you've probably already had some exposure to this in your professional life, or at least to something that was called a professional learning community. Hopefully by the end of this course, you'll be able to really evaluate whether or not those activities truly meet the definition of a learning community, because sometimes they might just be meetings that we like to call PLCs because it sounds better, right? But according to our authors, a learning community is, in the most basic sense, just a group of people who share common academic goals and attitudes, who meet semi-regularly to collaborate about their work, okay? So some of the requirements are membership. Obviously, you've got to be a member of this community, having influence within the group. Everybody's needs are getting fulfilled. There are opportunities to share events and make connections with the ultimate goal of advancing that collective knowledge of the group in a manner that supports the growth of the group, but then also individual knowledge as well. Some other requirements of learning communities, again, according to our authors, a learning community has to have a culture of learning. So everybody has to be committed to that, where everybody is involved in developing that collective understanding and putting forth a collective effort to reach the goals. So, four additional characteristics that a learning community must have. So, again, I challenge you to maybe reflect on some PLCs or communities that you've been a part of and ask yourself, well, did it contain these? So there needs to be a diversity of expertise among members who are valued for their contributions and given support to develop. We'll talk about what that means, what diversity of expertise means. Obviously, it can mean, people who have come from different backgrounds, different content areas, things of that sort. But it can also just mean experience, right? So, there might be veteran educators in the community. There might be brand new educators or teachers in the community. So that is also, having some diversity of expertise there just through the experiences that have been had. Another requirement is a shared objective of continually advancing the collective knowledge and skills. So it's easy to kind of get bogged down with the day to day. What are we doing this week? How did our students do on the last assessment? Things like that. But it's important to keep in mind that sort of objective of continuing to advance the knowledge of the group, not just focus on the day to day and the realities of what's going on in the school and the classrooms. There needs to be an emphasis on learning how to learn. So the group needs to establish what are the mechanisms that are going to be used to actually move that learning forward, again, both individually and collectively. And then also having some strategies for being able to share what has been learned. So building that into the cadence so that everybody has an opportunity to share what they've learned, or that the community as a whole kind of shares out maybe to other communities in the school or the organization what they have learned and what they've been working on. So again, I mentioned that we'll look at a lot of these concepts through like a classroom application lens and then also a professional lens. So if we think about this theory of learning communities in terms of a classroom, this may or may not, sorry, my dog's barking. This may or may not be something that you've done in the classroom, or that may not look like your classroom, and that's okay, right? Because our authors share that a learning community is a radical departure from what we think of as traditional schooling. So when we think of traditional schooling, right, every student needs to acquire individual knowledge, typically so that they can perform well on a benchmark assessment or a summative assessment or a state required assessment, right? And then everybody needs to acquire that knowledge at the same time. So when we finish our course at the end of the semester, everybody takes the same final exam. Everybody is expected to have acquired the same knowledge at the same time, and then be able to show mastery of that knowledge on the final exam or that summative assessment. Again, not saying that's how things look in your classroom, but that's in general a typical traditional view of education and schooling. So a learning community approach would differ from that, right? Because it would address the needs of students to deal with complex issues, figure things out for themselves, communicate, and work with people from diverse backgrounds and views, and then share what they've learned with others. So students have more autonomy as far as their learning. So in that learning communities approach, the teacher takes on a slightly different role. So again, in the traditional sense, the teacher is looked at as kind of the keeper of knowledge, right? They're the expert in the room. They're the one who who's going to dispense that knowledge to the students. But in a classroom that embraces more of a learning communities approach, they take on the role of that facilitator or that guide on the side where they can prepare student directed activities, but then give the students more freedom to interact with the material and really kind of go in different directions depending on what they're learning or what they want to learn. So again, that relationship shifts a bit as the students become more responsible for their own learning and the learning of others. Um, Jumping ahead to our current week, so Module 2, I'm not sure if you've done the readings yet for this week or if you haven't. Either way, again, this is kind of just a high-level overview of the material. So this week, we're talking about a specific type of learning community, and that is a community of practice. So a community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and then they learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So this graphic here shows kind of some of the components of a community of practice and how that interaction could typically take place. Communities of practice are usually informal, although they sometimes need, most of the time, need some sort of cultivation so that members feel they're at least getting some value out of their time. They may form organically, but in order to be sustained, they do need some sort of maintenance and support and cultivation. Um, Peripheral participation, this is how the process where new people learn to become more part of the community of practice. So as maybe new members join the community or, as the community gets established, just kind of defining how people can participate in that work and that dialogue. Um, Knowing that an individual may possess different identities in the various communities to which he or she belongs. So, maybe you're in a community of practice that's associated with something outside of work, right? Like a small group at church or, a community organization, something like that. Your role there is probably going to look very different than your role in a community of practice that may be taking place at your school or within your school district. So when we think about the communities of practice, the Venn diagram here kind of shows the main components there. So again, the domain is that topic or that shared interest that brings the group together. Community is how those relationships are built through dialogue and discussion and activities. And then the practice is the body of knowledge, the stories and the tools that are developed. So that collective knowledge that grows within the community. What does that look like in schools? Communities of practice in schools typically take the form of clubs, teams, groups, bands, choirs, that sort of thing, right? Especially in middle schools and high schools, students are moving from class to class, focusing on subjects and topics. So, there may be not as much of an opportunity to form a community of practice within a given class. But regardless of how that's formed, students typically engage in learning to become better participants in communities that matter to them. So that's why, we often see them as clubs or teams, is because students get involved in those because it's a topic that's of interest to them. Schools and other organizations should try to provide opportunities for students to form communities of practice around academic subject matter. Again, I know that's not always easy. And again, depending on the school, may not always be realistic, right? Like, do you really have students who are just, super excited about forming a community of practice because they're passionate about, pre-calculus or, chemistry? Maybe. But again, typically those communities are formed through more kind of formal groups. Again, can be focused on subject matter, but whether it's mathletes or academic skill bowl or something like that, typically students know what they're getting into. It just doesn't form organically. So again, typically requires some sort of special effort there by the adults. But again, some of those same things can still happen, even though the community may not form organically. I like this kind of chart here because it helps compare and contrast professional learning community to a community of practice. They share some common characteristics, but they also have some differences. So when we think about the members of these groups, typically a PLC, obviously educators who are committed to improving learning for all of their students. Whereas a community of practice could be educators who just share a concern or a passion for something and they want to learn how to do it better. So maybe you've got a PLC that's focusing on specific skills or improving students' performance on an assessment or improving literacy skills, things of that nature. A community of practice could be like teachers who are just really interested in maybe using technology in the classroom or artificial intelligence or maybe a specific topic that they're just really passionate about and hungry to learn more. Whereas a PLC is a more formal structure where, hey, our goal here is to promote and improve student learning. The community, again, in a PLC, typically it's site-based. Members work together to achieve that common goal, benefit the students as a whole. Whereas in a community of practice, members don't necessarily work together on a daily basis. It might be more informal, but they still build those relationships that allow them to learn from each other. How these groups are formed, again, thinking about maybe the PLCs you've had experience with, typically educators are told that they're going to be in this PLC and this is what you're going to do. Here are the goals. Here are the objectives. You may have more flexibility and autonomy to take on things within the PLC in your environment, but usually that's kind of what it looks like, right? Somebody's leading the charge on this and setting the structure. Whereas in a community of practice, there is no formal leader. It's just kind of organically developed, and everybody has a similar role. There might be managers or people who kind of take an informal leadership role in that community of practice, but again, it's not usually driven by a school leader or an administrator. The focus in PLCs, again, typically teams engage in collective inquiry of best practices to become better at teaching, improve student learning, develop new skills. Whereas in communities of practice, typically there's just joint activities or projects, sharing information, discussing, again, a lot more informal compared to PLCs. Culture, obviously collaboration is important in both. In a PLC, it's important to have that collaborative sort of school community in order to implement the practices that are being brought up. Whereas in a community of practice, that sort of trust is just built organically, naturally, so that collaboration and knowledge sharing can occur in a more informal manner. And then the effectiveness of the group in a PLC, again, usually looking at student data to judge the results and the effectiveness of the PLC and whether or not it's moved the needle in the right direction. Whereas in a community of practice, measuring isn't as objective. So there might be some quantitative components, qualitative components, just to measure how members are changing their practice, which may then ultimately improve student performance as well. Another sort of snapshot or comparison here, again, a lot of times we say, oh, yeah, this is a PLC, or oh, yeah, we're doing a community of practice. But is it really? Is it maybe more just like a work group or a project team or just kind of an informal group that, gets together once a month to, share war stories and debrief about what's going on, right? So I like how this chart kind of says, what is the purpose of the group? Who belongs? How's it held together? How long does it last? What's the duration? This kind of helps draw some lines there as far as what those different groups might be and whether or not they're actually a community of practice. All right, looking ahead to next week will be module 3. So it's the last week where we're focusing kind of like on theoretical aspects of learning communities. Next week, the focus will be on a different type of learning community called community of inquiry. So this week, community of practice. Next week, community of inquiry. In a community of inquiry, learning occurs through the interaction of 3 specific elements. So in order for the community to be a community of inquiry, there must be cognitive presence, social presence, and then teaching presence. So this community is really more kind of instructional classroom based because it's like, how do I establish this sort of community of inquiry and inquisition with my students in the classroom? Cognitive presence. So this is the extent to which the participants in any particular configuration of a community are able to construct meaning through their communication and work together. Social presence is the ability of participants to share their personal characteristics and their personality in the community, presenting themselves as real people. And then the teaching presence, that's the educator, that's the teacher. They're responsible, obviously, for designing how that experience is going to play out by selecting, organizing content and curriculum, primary presentation of the material, as well as kind of providing the design and the guardrails for the learning activities and the assessments that might be embedded within that community. This is a nice Venn diagram that kind of just shows how those different components or those domains, when they come together, they create that, ideal educational experience in terms of community of inquiry. So you've got, the social aspects, you've got the content and the curriculum, and then you've got the teacher who is leading and guiding that work. All right. So that brings us to the end of our first synchronous session. I told you this one would be probably a little shorter than the next couple will be. Again, just wanted to be respectful of your time while also, covering some of those key concepts. Our next synchronous session will be in a couple weeks, also on a Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Central Time. I think everybody here is on Central Time except for me. I'm not sure. I'm on Eastern Time, so I'm an hour ahead of you guys. But on the 27th, it'll be a similar sort of structure. We'll look at modules 4 and 5, look ahead to module 6, and as I mentioned, we will review and discuss the midterm paper, which is that module 5 analysis paper. So definitely look ahead to that before synchronous session 2, so you can make sure that you understand the requirements and what's going to be expected of you for that. So again, as I shared, I'll try to get your first discussion board graded in the next couple of days. I try to provide you with some feedback there, so make sure you take note of that as well so that you can get the most out of the activities. So unless anyone has questions or comments, we can go ahead and wrap up. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate you joining. Have a nice evening.